Welcome to the Poultry Keepers Podcast. In this episode, Mandelyn, John, and Rip will help you understand why you don't always get the number of eggs you were expecting from your flock. So, let's get started.
Today, we're going to be shedding light on where are my eggs? So stay tuned and we'll explain it all coming right up. So, Mandelyn, let's start off. First-year layers commonly lay through their first winter, depending on their breed and productivity. What's your thoughts on that?
It does boil down to what they were bred to withstand and to be productive through things such as reduced daylight hours. So as soon as we start losing those summertime hours and we get into those winter light phases, a seasonal laying bird is going to stop laying. That's her body's response to the light saying, it's winter, you're not hatching babies. That means you're not laying. So if you look at all of our wild species out there, they're going to start laying when those daylight hours start picking up. That's when you hear the bird song and the mating dances and everything. So that by April or so, depending on your zone, those birds have already built a nest and they're already starting to lay. But for chickens, we want to see eggs year round. And so that's where we go into our production breeding. And parts of that are going to be light driven.
And also for hatching, a lot of people like to do hatching in the fall for spring replacements, and especially for spring point of lay pullet sales. To have an 18-week-old pullet ready for sale 1st of April, you're perfectly positioned in the market around here. And to do that, we need to backtrack. So that means we're setting and hatching in late fall, early winter to hit that date, which is not when our chickens are naturally going to be cooperating with that process without a little extra incentives.
Exactly right. In show poultry, we try to time hatches to meet certain particular shows we want to go to for that year. And that means when's the show date, we got to backtrack however many months it takes a female to get mature. And that's when we need to hatch. And that can give us some pretty weird hatching days.
It can.
And there's really no way to overcome it without artificial lighting. And that's a big key what we're going to be talking about tonight.
That's right.
Or today, sometime. What about, and y'all probably have to deal with this more than I do. What about weather stress? Cold weather, severe storms, can that cause a pause in egg production?
Oh, days or weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John,
Depending
what
on what's
happens when you
happening.
get a big blizzard? Do they turn off for a moment?
Although I say go dry for a couple of days at a time. They seem to know, like my arthritic knee and now ankle knows a day or two in advance, and they'll start to not lay. It's pretty interesting. I think they're very sensitive to barometric pressure changes. Us older folks are.
No comment on the older folks, okay?
It's if I go out and there's no eggs or there's just one or two, I've got 2 rock stars. They just lay no matter what. And those are the chickens that I'm going to be collecting from to set for replacements. The other ones are breakfast eggs.
Correct.
But that's a good harbinger of weather. There's a lot of old folklore surrounding this, or we call it indigenous knowledge or fairy tales, whatever you want to call it. But there's a lot of truth to these things. Animals, cows will dry up, chickens will stop laying, harbingers of misfortune or bad weather.
Anytime
here
I
in
go out to my barn, if I don't see any eggs, my mind immediately goes to what happened.
It's
What
either a
caused that?
predator
Oh, yeah.
at 3
Oh,
o'clock
yeah.
at night sniffing around.
Yep.
That'll
They're so sensitive to so many different things. And if you don't have them on camera, you can find yourself going through little rabbit holes trying to figure out why you didn't see as many eggs as what you were anticipating.
Mhm.
And if it only lasts a day or 3, okay, fine. If it starts dragging into multiple weeks, that's where I'm really trying to dig in and find out what happened. Where did my eggs go?
Yeah, it can be something as simple as a mouse is finding its way in and upsetting the chickens in the middle of the night. If they don't feel it's safe to lay, they're not going to.
I don't think a lot of folks realize just how little it takes to stress our chickens. They're a lot more sensitive than so many folks realize. It doesn't take much to throw them off their laying game. Now, before we started recording this, I was talking with you guys about the weather differences, and Mandelyn's got snow. John's not quite got snow, but it's coming. And I'm sitting down here in sunny Florida. It was 45 degrees this morning. So I don't have quite the weather impacts that you guys do, but I have the other impacts, the predators, bad weather, whatever, but just not the cold weather. So I'm much more fortunate than you guys are.
Luckily, the primary driving factor is day length, hours. So as long as we have the right number of hours in the right spectrum of light, everything's fine. And we can very easily control or manipulate that to our heart's content. We've talked about that plenty in the past, I think. Now it's time to really dig down in there and fine tune it.
Mandelyn, when you start adding supplemental light onto your birds, what do you shoot for? How many hours? What do you think it takes for your flock?
In between 14 and 16 hours. Going past 16 hours is way too much. Dipping under 14 hours, it varies. So within that 2-hour window, and when we start really losing daylight, I start backing it up closer to 14 rather than the 16, because I want them to have a natural bedtime and have the lights come on in the morning, because that's just another instance of when stress can be caused and you won't get any eggs. If those lights are doing an automatic on, automatic off with no dim, it'll shock the birds just in that little action. They're really more sensitive to a lot of different factors than I think people want to give them credit for.
Especially plunging them into darkness in the evening.
Yeah, when they're in the
That's
middle of
not cool
eating,
at all. Yeah.
because
And
their
having
night
the natural
vision is
sunset is really
terrible.
important, and that kind of signals them to finish up their eating and get on the roost before the sun goes down. And if your lights just plunge them into total darkness out in the yard at 5:45 in the evening, it can cause them to panic, and they could pile, they could stress. Chickens sometimes aren't so smart. They could just like freak out and freeze up out there and need extra motivation, which requires you to put on your snowshoe and galoshes and motivate them back into the coop.
John, I think you've probably done more research into this than us other folks here. But what about light spectrum? What matters there?
There's a couple of different spectrums of light that trigger different things in the chicken. The easiest thing to remember is if you just get, and it doesn't need to be strong, a full spectrum light. And I would actually, so what I've used with great success are very low power. It's 110 watt equivalent. It's equivalent to the old T5 fluorescent tubes. I used to use these bulbs for microgreen production. So it's like a 5-watt LED strip light, but it's full spectrum for greenhouse use, which the plants need. And the chickens just love it. And there is inherently no flicker. And that is more important than anything else when it comes to lighting, I believe, is that there's no flicker in your light source, because that will absolutely drive your birds insane.
It will make them nuts.
It's like making them live in a strobe light. To their vision, like you won't see it with your naked eye, chances are, but they'll see it as if it's a strobe light.
And if you lived your life in a constant rage party, I could see where it could cause some disturbances. Our job as poultry keepers is to give our chickens the best life possible every day of it, and then one bad day at the end. So I try to keep everything as chill as possible. I keep my lights. Right now, I'm looking for those hens that are just still productive at a 14-hour threshold. So when the fall comes, I do dial my lights back to 14 hours. So they are popping on at about 3 o'clock in the morning right now. But really just 3 of my hens are laying, and it's exactly the 3 hens that I want. Those are the ones that are going to continue to lay at the lower day length. And that's what I'm selecting for and have been selecting for.
John, you were talking about flicker rate. And one easy way to check this is just take your cell phone and shoot a video on slow motion.
Absolutely.
And then play it back. You can actually see the flicker in those bulbs.
Yeah. And not just your primary lighting source. I have a bunch of low voltage party string lights. that are all weather and they're outdoors on my porch. And I ran some around inside the garage in the barn just as a kind of low light source. And when I was recording my lights to see if they were good, and they were, I happened to notice in that video that the party lights were strobing. And I went, oh, that's not good. And I went over and I flicked them off. And it was interesting because it was almost instantaneous. As soon as I flicked off those lights, this is back when I had quail last month, they just seemed to calm down. Quail are wonderful meters of things. They're very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Sensitive.
Sensitive. They respond very well. And you guys saw the video difference between a red light and a blue light in the quail brooder.
Yes.
Same thing going on. Super sensitive. So now those lights are just out. They have no business in my barn anymore. It's not a place for ambient party mood. It's business.
We talked on it just a little bit, touched on it there, but it doesn't take much light.
No.
The recommendation is roughly a 60-watt bulb for every 200 square feet of space you're trying to light for chickens.
Yeah.
That's not a whole bunch of light. And the color of the light, that obviously plays a role. White lights can be the most stressful. So if you're going to use a white light, I would go for a warm white. That's not quite as bad as a bright
down in
white.
The cooler spectrum.
Yes. Red lights, it has a very calming effect, and it helps prevent feather picking. Mostly we see red lights being used in brooders for baby chicks because that has that calming effect, and it has that sort of a deterrent to feather picking. But surprisingly, blue-colored light helps promote body development.
Yes.
And they have seen studies where birds have responded when they were chicks. They raised on blue lights, and those birds that were under blue lights were significantly larger than the birds that had been under reds or whites.
Jeff had told us a story years ago now, and I've seen it in practice a few times, and I went, yeah, I remember when Jeff told us about that. So around here, a lot of people have clear span structures, and they alternate their panels with different colors because it doesn't cost any extra when you're ordering it. And it's about a 85% light transmission cloth. But when they're alternating panels of white and blue or white and green, the chickens will naturally congregate under the blue or green panels and avoid being directly underneath the white panels of the filtered light coming through the roofs. That's where they want to be. They choose to be there.
I can't help but wonder, John and Mandelyn, I want to get your thoughts, but do you suspect that there might be an advantage to using red light and blue light for birds?
As long as you're full spectrum, I don't think you need to have a dedicated red light and a dedicated blue light.
Sounds like you could almost put them on separate ends and figure out which ones the birds like better.
Good point.
I mean, for science, for sure.
I just started to say that'd be a good little experiment.
Put food and water on both sides under both colors and see what their preference is.
Or if we really want to get fancy, in the horticultural world, there's something called an Emerson effect that we chase, which is a gradual phasing in the morning from blue into the yellow spectrum and then into the white. And then in the evening, gradually phasing into the ultra or the deeper red spectrums.
Would that have anything to do with mimicking what the sun does naturally?
That's precisely what we're doing in the horticultural world. Yeah, it's called the Emerson effect. And a lot of plants actually trigger off of that because there's things like the Krebs cycle, there's synthetic dependent cycles, and there's non-photosynthetic dependent cycles, but we're getting off track. Sorry.
Mandelyn, do you know why they call it the Emerson effect? When they're raising baby chicks, they go through and they say, Emerson, nice chicks. Sorry, folks, it's still early.
That's beautiful.
That's
And with me being up here in Ohio, that's why I've not heard that. I have to go see my family in Tennessee before I hear stuff like that.
You're deprived. What about the number of eggs a hen will lay? A lot of folks don't realize that pullets are born with all the microscopic eggs that they will lay
in their lifetime.
What about
so do chickens on the equator run out of eggs before chickens up here on the 45th parallel? Because
I don't know. Could very well be.
Or are they
Um,
more seasonal layers like jungle fowl are? Because if they're a seasonal layer and they're really active for 6 months or less out of a year, those are the birds that are going to lay much longer into their life versus highly productive bred birds. Like when you look up a leghorn, what is it annually for that first year from a leghorn? 53.
320, 350.
That's almost an egg a day for an
Yes.
entire full 4-season year. And that's definitely productive and not just a seasonal layer. Like I know from my heritage turkeys, they're going to be a seasonal layer. And at most, I'm looking for 90 eggs out of a whole calendar year because they're going to do it seasonally. All the other chicken types, they're going to fall within that either being productive bred or being a little more seasonal based with some flex. Like an average dual purpose kind of bird, they might only do 175, 220. They're not probably going to push it past 250 eggs a year. And how they're grown even will impact how many eggs you could expect from them. And when they do have those egg output numbers, it's going to be more based in the spring, and you might be hard pressed to get eggs from them in October.
Yep. And that's how it's easier for me to collect from the hens that I want to breed from. They were my 5 to 6 egg a week hens, and now they've dropped back to 3 or 4 a week, but they're the only ones still laying.
Yeah, that's definitely what you want to hatch from if you want to have that year-round kind of production.
Yeah. And if we're looking at it's November 22nd, I need chicks available, point of lay pullets at 18 weeks on the 1st of April. Time to start thinking about these things and getting that nutrition.
One thing I wanted to talk about here, and this is a good spot to bring it up, is early laying, early sexual maturity. I know a lot of folks try to
Right.
push as much early sexual maturity as they possibly can out of their birds.
I
Yeah, there's just
deliberately
stopping
try to
stuff.
delay it.
Yes.
The nice thing about winter hatching is if I could get them on a regulated light cycle, then I can put them on a natural light transition. So just as they're coming into their production age, the natural light cycle is triggering that for light stimulation. And I'm perfectly fine keeping them in the dark for a week or two longer for better maturation, better carcass and frame development.
Yes.
I've got big hands, so processing birds, I need those pin bones as widely spaced as possible. I'm starting to think selfishly now, but for my own ease and use, that's becoming more and more important. And of course, it's beneficial for the hens. Mandy is always talking about that pin bone spacing for production.
But you only have to have those bones dig into your wrist a couple of times before you start figuring out why and how to fix it. Now
Exactly.
I can get my hands so far up into a cockerel, I can scoop the lungs by hand.
Yeah. And those nitrile gloves are expensive. I calculate them out. They're 4.5 cents a piece. And then when I buy them by the case.
And you don't want to go through a parabird.
Nope.
Well, part of the problem with this early sexual maturity, early laying, is that once a pullet starts laying, she's pretty much going to stop growing because she's channeling all those nutrients and energy into producing eggs and not to producing body mass. You're
That's
also going to
fairly
get
common.
smaller egg size from those early maturing females, and it will take them longer to get up to a hatchable size. And
Yes,
sometimes
if they
they
ever
really
do.
don't. I just started to say sometimes they don't do that. You have an increased danger of prolapse in those early laying birds. That's where the egg gets hung up in the cloaca, and the birds keep pushing and pushing, trying to get the egg out, and they actually have part of the cloaca hanging outside of their body. And once that happens, it's never a good thing. Sometimes you can treat it, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And those early laying birds, they found that lifetime egg production can be reduced. With commercial flocks, they don't worry about it because they bring birds in, they let them lay for a year, and then they're out the door to the processing plant, and they bring another bunch of birds in. But for us, longevity is important. Long laying times are important. It's something to think about. And I get really frustrated on some groups because it's like they seem to have a competition. My birds started laying at 5 months. Oh, I started laying at 4 months, and I'm sitting there pulling what little hair I got
Ooh, I
left
got my
down to the
first
top of
egg
it.
at 12 weeks. I'm like,
That's
oh,
right.
no, that's not good. That's not something to brag about.
Okay, I'm going to get down off my high horse now.
Oh, no.
Enough said.
This is so important because you're literally selecting and breeding in the wrong direction. And with what we know about epigenetic development, you keep doing this for a generation or two, and you are severely locking yourself in. And you might as well start raising bantams eventually.
Because my breed can be prone to that early maturing. If they start laying before 18 weeks, I already know they're a call. I already know I don't need that bird anywhere near a breeding pen. 18 weeks is the absolute soonest, and it depends on her weight and her bone spacing on if she gets to continue doing that or not. Because if they get started early, okay, but do they check out on everything else? Because depending on their development, it might be early for what they're built for. And some of them did need another month to grow and finish up. So it's a lot to look at. If they get started before 24 weeks, you need to make sure everything else checks out with them.
What about selecting breeds for your egg laying goals for your flock? What's your thoughts on that?
It really depends on what you're trying to do with them. And if you're trying to have a little side hustle for selling breakfast eggs, then you're going to want to have predictable production. And that means you're going to want those leghorns and other high producing birds, or even sex links that have that built in gender identification at hatch and the higher production levels. If you need it to be a business model, then you want to skip the slower producing birds because you won't be able to predict your eggs. Now, if you want just your own basket and you're okay whether you get 3 or 10 eggs a day, then you can start looking at other attributes in the breeds that you want to have. But you have to make that choice between production and I'm not that worried about it.
I lost my train of thought here. Imagine that. What about dual purpose breeds? Give us your honest evaluation on dual purpose breeds as egg layers. I got my thoughts, but I want to know what y'all's are.
They better perform. Otherwise, they're out of here.
They have to perform, yeah. I think it's easier to squeeze an egg out rather than a meaty carcass. The meaty carcass seems to be more elusive and trickier to get in there because of how much breeding work was done towards those eggs, especially over the last 60, 70 years. Everything's more reliable at laying than doing the meat part. So I preserve the rate of lay. What I'm fooling with didn't need much work on the egg laying part. So I was able to focus more on the meat and just making sure the eggs stayed exactly how they were coming.
On average, how many eggs do you get from a female, Mandelyn?
I need them to do a minimum of 5 a week, but 6 is better.
John, what about you? What are you
Same.
shooting for?
5 a
Same.
week, 6 would be better. Last year, I had a hen. She laid nonstop, never took a pause. So I set every one of her eggs I could get. She was also my rogue hen, so I set every one of her eggs I could find.
Makes a difference.
Well, and I've had a couple of dual-purpose breeds before. Brahmas come to mind, where I didn't get a first egg until they were 8, 9 months old, and after they were in active lay, it was only 3 eggs a week. And then once they saw a grouping of 3 eggs, boom, now they're broody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Poultry Keepers Podcast. We hope you found it helpful. Be sure to join us next Tuesday for another podcast episode.